So I was just dropped off in a parking lot, and I was like, well, this was unexpected. I don't know what I'm going to do for the night, because it had already been, like, partly into the day. I don't know what time it was, but it wasn't early in the day anymore. And I didn't know where I was, and I remember thinking, you know what, Calen? Just chill. Just walk into the grocery store. And I seriously, people talk about this happening to them, and I haven't had many moments like this, but I honestly did have a moment where it's like I heard a voice saying, if you just walk into the grocery store, it'll all be fine. I feel like I seriously had someone's other voice in my head saying that, and I can't explain it because that's maybe one of the only times it's ever happened in my life. But I went to walk into the grocery store. Before I even made it in, I put my bike on the thing. I'm about to walk through the doors, and this person who was probably in their mid-20s at the time came out and said, oh, are you biking? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, what are you doing? And we started talking, and then their friends came out who they must have been with. One person was wearing a suit that had gemstones connected to it some way and had a live parrot sitting on his shoulder. The other person looked like this, like, magical, mystic person. And the other one was the guy's brother that I was talking to. And they looked really similar. And they were all, like, maybe in their late 20s, early 30s. And so I started talking to all of them, and they asked me, they're like, do you have a place to sleep tonight? And I said that I didn't. And the one person's like, oh, you can stay at my house, but I have a really steep hill in my driveway that makes it hard to get up to my house. My friend Brother Tom, I saw him in the store. Let me see if you could stay with him. I was like, Brother Tom? Who's Brother Tom? So the person goes back in the store and comes back out with this guy who was in his 70s with a white beard, really kind face. I've shown you pictures of him before.
Yes, and this is also going to have to be up in the write-up.
Yeah, I will show the pictures.
So, Brother Tom, I feel like when you see Brother Tom, you just know.
You know.
Something, right?
Yeah.
You just know. Like,
yeah.
This is the person that is going to take me somewhere that's going to be cool.
It's going to be amazing.
Yeah. You just know, like, Brother Tom's going to... Yes.
And you look at Brother Tom and you trust him.
Yes. Yeah. He's got a very trusting look, kind, loving, just, like, genuinely...
Sweet.
Yeah. I think you can read a lot from his face, I would say.
Yeah. I have a couple pictures of him, so I would definitely put both of them up somewhere related to this podcast where you can listen to it, or look at it. And you will see what we mean when you look at Brother Tom's face. Because Tim could see all that just by looking at a picture of Brother Tom and not even knowing the full story. So Brother Tom comes out, so sweet, hardly asked me any question, was like, you can stay at my place. I live really close to here and it might be easier for you. So Brother Tom had ridden his bike to the co-op, hopped on his bike. I followed him to his house. He had one other roommate. And they had an extra spare room with just a mattress on the ground that no one was staying in. And they let me stay in there. I ended up staying with him for under a week, but maybe close to a week. At least like 5 days, maybe. And he turned into my adopted grandpa that I've always wanted and never really had. He was so sweet. We went and we would get salads together at the co-op. We talked about veganism. He ate all vegan with me. I don't know if he's vegan now or not, but it seems like he would be. He already loved veggies and he was healthy. He took me to this woodworking shop that was owned by his friends that sometimes he went into and made things. He introduced me to people. He took me to an African dance class. Yes. And just kind of threw me into it because he drummed at it.
Okay.
There was probably 20 live drummers there. And just threw me into the class, which was really awkward, but I loved watching everyone else dance. And my favorite thing was that we put both of our bikes into his car. We went into the redwood forest. We did the Avenue of the Giants, and then we biked together.
That's awesome.
And once again, he kicked my butt in the biking thing where I'm like, and he's just zooming along, and it was beautiful. I have a couple pictures he took of me, and I took some pictures of him, and we just had the best day together, like under the magical redwoods. And he's telling me all the stuff about his life. I mean, yeah, he was in his 70s. He had a lot of information and wisdom to share.
And for those that are looking for a good, I don't know, just like place to travel, the Humboldt State Park, I believe that's what it's called, is where the Avenue of the Giants are. I think it's the longest stretch of redwoods, I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have anything in front of me, so I'm just like
I'm pretty sure we
trying
read
to
that
recall
though.
this from memory, but I believe it's the longest stretch of redwoods, like possibly in the world. And you can drive through the Avenue of the Giants, and then also there's a multitude of hikes off the road, and it's incredible.
You could bike it too.
Yeah, you can bike it as well, and it's, at least when we went, there weren't a ton of people there at all. And it looks like if you're intimidated by biking on the road, that looks like it would be a
Really
pretty good
safe
road to start. It's safe.
Yeah.
It's flat. I remember it being relatively flat.
Yeah, some parts are a little twisty, but most of it is. Cars are going pretty slow.
Yeah, I mean, it is beautiful. So that's, if you're doing the redwoods, that's a good one to do.
Especially on a rainy day if you're not going to be hiking, because we did that on a rainy day and it was beautiful.
Yeah, I think we just got out and walked around the visitors center. Like, there's a few trails that we did, but it's incredible. So.
Yeah, so imagine I got to bike through there with Brother Tom.
That
like
sounds
my
magical.
my newfound grandpa. And I remember on the way back, two things happened. One, he told me all about hitchhiking back in the day.
Of course.
He was like a straight up hippie.
Like straight from the 60s.
Yes. Yeah. And he was telling me all the tips and tricks, because at that point I hadn't hitchhiked in the U.S. I had when I was an exchange student a couple times, but I hadn't in the U.S. I'd been using rideshare, and he's like, oh, well, just in case like something doesn't line up, you're going to need to know how to do this. Taught me how to do that, was giving me tips, was telling me about his hitchhiking stories. And then we stopped at a beach, and I wish I could remember the book that he brought. I can't remember what it was. It was like some folklore, I think.
Okay.
And we stopped at the beach and watched the sun go down while he read to me from his favorite book. Oh. Then we went back to his house, and he finished reading to me as I fell asleep. And I know that he like tucked me in and then walked out the door. Like, super cute.
Yeah.
So the time with him was pretty amazing.
That sounds pretty special.
It was so special. He's like, I wish I could get in contact with him, but I can't find his email or number now on this phone. So if anyone knows Brother Tom from Arcata, let me know, because I'd love to find him, because we used to text and send each other emails and pictures, but then I lost his information. So eventually I just knew it was time to keep going. Although I loved it there, I couldn't live there forever, even though I felt like I could. Yeah. And I said goodbye to Brother Tom. I biked down to Eureka, where you and I had the run-in with the hotel. And I was supposed to couch surf at this one house, but it was really uncomfortable. It was just weird. I had a really weird vibe from the moment I went in. There was a ton of people running around in this house. And I'm all fine with nudity and everything. But there was like grown kids like walking around naked, which was just a weird thing to walk into. Like, and it wasn't like a hippie situation. I don't know what it was. It didn't have that vibe, you know, like peace, love, naked. Yeah. It was just weird. I don't know. I remember a lot of grown kids walking around naked, and the people were speaking in Spanish, but we were talking about some drug exchange that maybe went wrong. Pretty sure I saw a gun in the house, and I just had some really weird, bad vibes. Yeah. And I got up and left, but it was in the evening time, and I remember I called Brother Tom, because maybe Arcata is like, 30 miles away? And he immediately was like, he told me that Eureka wasn't the safest place. So I already knew that it might be a little weird, I don't know. And he came and picked me up, took me to his friend's house that lived in Eureka, and I slept in the loft in the garage of his friend's house for the night. Then I got up, I kept on biking, and then I went to Ferndale. And by the time I'm in Ferndale, I had this like grand idea. I'd always wanted to go to California. This is my first time in California on this trip. And I had some grand idea. I thought I might maybe move there.
Yeah.
That once I got there, my life would be changed. I would have had done this huge trip, and everything would be different, and I'd be the happiest person in the world, and I would have done all these things, and then I would settle down and move to California, probably.
Yeah.
And just, I don't know why, I had a breakdown that day. I'm biking from Eureka to Ferndale, going down the coast of California, and it was hot. I remember I was tired, and I was like, well, I reached California and nothing's changed. Like,
Yeah.
I just woke up that day, wrong side of the bed, like, what am I doing with my life now? Because I'm here. And not everything has changed like I thought it would. And then my tire pops on my bike. And that was actually the first time, besides the huge accident, that something had happened. So I didn't really know how to change a tire. Probably had never changed a tire before. So I get out my book, and I'm on the side of the road. I remember, like, throwing stuff because I couldn't get it. And I remember some random older lady pulled up and handed me $5. Like, just rolled up in the car and was like, are you okay? And I'm, like, crying. I'm, like, throwing my bike tire down. And she said, maybe you should take the bus. And gave me a $5 bill and kept driving. Which was very random. But, and I was also out of money again at this point. Like, completely out of money, so I had like $5.
Yeah.
That was the $5 that I had. And so I finally fixed my bike tire. Like, there was a hole in it. I remember I had to change it, and I had a spare one. And I bike into Ferndale, and by the time I'm in Ferndale, this really small town, I stopped and asked someone if there was a campground or a place to park for free, because the map didn't have one, I guess, at that time. And I couldn't find anything. It's such a small town. I couldn't find anything through couch surfing or warm showers. And it was looking like I didn't know where I was going to stay for the night. And I asked someone if there was a campground, and they told me that it was like $12 a night. And I had $5. And I remember crying as soon as they said that. Because I'm just like, where am I going to go? I remember thinking this world is expensive.
Yeah.
You know, even though it was a trip and I could have called my parents.
Yeah.
And whatever, I could be home safe, you know. I didn't want to. And I remember just crying because I was like, I only have $5 that this random person just gave me. So I'm going down the sidewalk. I get off my bike and I'm pushing it down the sidewalk all upset. And I stop and I'm crying. I'm like doing a hard cry because I'm just so frustrated. I don't know what I'm doing. Again, it's the middle of the day. And then I call my mom and I'm crying on the phone. I'm talking to my mom. And then someone I realize in a car is wanting me to move from the spot I'm crying in. And then I realize I'm in someone's driveway right next to this pizza shop. And so I kind of hung up on my mom, and the lady rolled down the window. She goes, are you okay, sweetie? And I remember, you know, sometimes people ask you if you're okay and you don't tell them. You're like, I'm fine, just let me live my life.
Yeah.
But I was like, I'm not okay. And I just I was already in it, so it was hard to pretend like the breakdown wasn't happening. And she's like, oh, she was so sweet. Her name's Yvette. And at the time, she was with her partner, Adrian. And she was so sweet. And she's like, honey, you know, it was their house that I was standing in the driveway to. She invited me in. She sent me directly to take a shower, which I really needed and felt really good. They had a catering company, and she's a really good cook. I remember she made me lentils. So they got me food. They sat me down. We talked about my travels. And I almost immediately felt like they were like my second parents. And they were so sweet. And we ended up talking a bunch, and I felt so comfortable with them, and eventually they told me I could just pitch a tent in their front yard. And I said, okay, that sounds awesome, because I didn't know where I was going to sleep tonight. And then, we were still hanging out, and a little bit later they said, well, you can sleep inside. We just didn't want to sound creepy, like luring you into some random people's house. We didn't want to scare you. But if you want, people know us around here, you can go ask. Like, go ask the pizza company, go ask. It's a really small town. She was like, you can go ask. I promise we're not creepy. We just want to give you a place to stay. And I was like, no. I'm like, it was going to be kind of cold tonight, so I'm glad you asked me to stay inside. I'll definitely stay inside. And then things go on as they do, and I end up staying there for at least a week. And we go on drives together to find cows. We go to the beach. We go exploring as like a little family. And I end up working for them, for their catering company, at weddings. They get booked for weddings, and I remember doing a wedding with them, and then making things in the kitchen, gardening. So I made money there, like a lot in a week, or whatever amount of time that was. And it was just so magical in that little town. I could ride my bike to the beach by myself, which had this really dark, soft, moist sand in the really wild coastline like you saw of California.
Yeah, Ferndale is really cute.
Yeah, it's so cute.
Yeah, it seems they're really expensive to live there, but
yeah,
it's funny, like, because you've told me this story before, and then we went to Ferndale. We were there on this trip that we're on now. We were there. Wow, it had been probably a month ago.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, someone just flashed their lights at me.
It's okay.
Yeah, it was funny though because we parked outside of Yvette's house.
Yeah.
So that you could just at least go and say hi to Yvette, because when can you do that?
Yeah. And I wanted to see the house again.
Yeah. And we parked outside, and it's just right off the street. I think there was a brewery, maybe a restaurant. I remember seeing people drinking.
That's the
outside.
Pizza place.
Okay. And then on the sidewalk, right next to the house, you're and this is where I broke down and cried. Yeah. And then Yvette was just trying to get into her driveway.
Yeah. Yeah. The people at the pizza company were staring at me like I had lost my mind, I want to add.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, the patio is right there, 2 feet away.
Right there. That's funny. I could see just the little bit that I've, heard, Yvette's voice and also, the text exchanges and stuff. And she left us, with this big goodie bag of, my back was hurting, so she'd have this medicinal salve because that she put in this goodie bag, and a ton of nutritional yeast, and a large 5-pound bag of quinoa and all of these snacks and goodies, and you could just tell that she's a very nurturing spirit. For sure.
Yeah.
That was kind of the perfect person to stumble upon. She just she seems to be very loving and almost a healer of sorts.
Yeah, she's very motherly, very healing.
Yeah.
Very strong, but gentle presence.
Yeah, so it seems that however that happened, it just seems you broke down in the perfect moment of having an emotional breakdown.
Yeah.
It was just it was so perfect. Not only was it outside of her house, but she was literally trying to get past you just to pull into her house.
The odds of all the driveways that I had already passed, that was just the spot.
And then the fact that was however many years ago, and that you're still in touch, and it seems it's really cool.
Yeah. It was a really special, magical time. I feel there was a lot of just honesty and opening up about things. And you know, when people come to your town, it can make you realize what's there and explore it more because you're trying to show the other person.
Like kind of eye-opening, yeah.
So I think that happened too.
Very cool.
Because I really wanted to see cows. So we went all over trying to see cows. And now when I see cows that aren't on a sanctuary, I'm sad. And I'm upset and I'm angry. But at that point, I just hadn't seen that many farmed animals and I was vegan. And I really wanted to see cows. Yeah. So they drove me all over the place trying to find some cows that were not scared of humans that we could go up to. I mean, we spent hours trying to find a cow, honestly. There's a ton of cows out there, but we would try to walk up to them. Yeah. And, I mean, I was on a mission, and they really did. It was just so much fun.
That's funny.
Yeah. And it was just so cool. Like, working with their catering company, too, I would do all the vegetarian stuff. And I met a lot of other kids that were my age at the time. And they were just like the community parents. And they were giving out wisdom left and right. And I don't know. It was really special. I stumbled upon a really special couple.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And I don't know if we're going to recount all my trips. I think that we might, that's our plan with this series of podcasts. Yeah. But you'll realize that 2 more times I go back to work for her on 2 other separate years. So we definitely did stay in touch over the years.
Yeah, like definitely kept maintained the relationship.
Yes.
And it seems like your closest friends and people that you care the most about outside of your family are people that you've met on travels.
Yeah.
Like
I met Charlie traveling.
Charlie in New Mexico. Charlie, if you're listening to this, thanks for hosting us for how many days?
Like maybe 5 in all. Charlie's also on this podcast about pleasure in a pandemic, about having sex and doing anal safely and all these things. So go listen to that episode with Charlie.
And Rivers in LA.
Yep, Rivers.
Who we also saw on this trip.
I met in North Carolina, Rivers. Oh, no, I met Rivers in D.C. when I was traveling at protesting the Trump inauguration. And then we sat in front of a slaughter truck together, and that really bonded us.
Yeah. Like, we got arrested together?
Yes, we got arrested together.
And I'm doing civil disobedience.
Yes. Have been best friends ever since. There's also an episode with Rivers of this podcast that we recorded after we drove across the country together.
Nice.
So yeah, you're right. Some of my favorite people are usually met through traveling.
Yeah.
Boom. Boom, baby. Another reason to travel.
Yeah.
So yeah, after all of that magicalness, this is another spot where it's like, I'm not quite sure in my mind. I kept going down the coast of California, but now I had cash.
And you knew, so now you had some reserves because you
like hundreds of dollars.
Company.
Yes.
And you're like, okay, it's time for me to keep going.
Time for me to keep going. You know it's time to move on.
And you were like pretty far north.
Yes.
At this point, I mean you're like still in Northern California.
Mm-hmm.
And you're headed down what sounds like maybe the 101, Interstate 101, going down, or Highway 101, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Going down the coast of California.
Yes.
Okay.
Going down the coast.
And are you biking?
So this is where I can't remember.
Okay.
After Ferndale, I think I did bike some more because I don't remember taking a bus. I don't remember anyone picking me up.
Do you remember? Is your trauma so severe from that bike accident that you repressed all memories of biking?
I cannot remember a lot of unless someone took a picture of me doing it.
Yeah.
Or I took a picture of something that I saw along the way. Or I have a weird random memory of sitting down on the sidewalk in Crescent City. I honestly could not remember a lot of it. Or unless it was really scary, biking on that interstate, listening to Will Tuttle podcasts, or meditations. I just can't. Yeah, it made me so nervous.
So, what's
I-
the first thing you remember after
Oh, jeez.
Ferndale? Because, I mean, it didn't seem like... I remember we passed by Santa Cruz, it didn't seem like any memory sparked there.
No, I visited Santa Cruz another year.
Okay.
After working for Yvette, actually. Another year.
And
But it's weird. My memory goes out there because the next part that I really remember is meeting my friend Ben in San Francisco. But I also couldn't remember if that was on this bike trip because I had multiple trips that were like no money trips
Yeah.
in California. I think I had 3 of them.
Okay.
So some of those memories get weird, and I had to ask him if we got together in San Francisco on my bike trip, and he said it was.
Okay.
So the last memory I have after Ferndale is San Francisco, which is obviously a big chunk of area. But I honestly cannot remember how I got there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a decent size, but, I mean, it's not, like, as big as, like, Montana to Oregon.
No, yeah, exactly.
But it's a pretty... Yeah, okay.
I want to say that maybe a bike tick, because I can't remember a different thing.
That'd have to be a kind of scary thing to bike into San Francisco. Well, I imagine maybe they have... I don't know. I mean, maybe they have some type of bike system that would be a little bit safer. It's just, so densely populated.
San Francisco has like actual bike paths on the road, whereas biking on the interstate is terrifying. Biking on back roads where people didn't like bikers was a bit terrifying because people would almost hit you. They'd blare their horn at you.
Yeah.
I mean, I do remember, a lot of the parts about biking I remember were parts that scared me because I do remember being on back roads where I'm like, oh, this won't be bad, and someone almost hitting me with their car, and then even though I was on the side minding my own business, slamming their horn on and yelling at me. And I told other bikers this, and they're like, yeah, we've experienced the same things in some parts of the U.S.
So, you're in San Francisco.
In San Francisco.
Now, a question I guess I have. This would be an interesting part. Like, how long did you stay in San Francisco?
Well, I remember we stayed a little bit above San Francisco for a couple days with my mom's friend from high school.
Above San Francisco?
Yeah.
It's like...
Maybe near Napa Valley, I want to say.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, we stayed there for, I think, 2 days total. Just because we needed a place to meet and stay. And then we went into San Francisco. I think that we were at least in San Francisco, the actual city, for a couple days. And then I remember we biked over the bridge. Or it might just be one day because I don't remember staying the night there. Yes, we did. We couch surfed with my friend Ish.
Oh, nice.
Who was vegan actually.
So that was kind of my curiosity was I mean, it's such an expensive place. So you couch surfed.
We couch surfed with this person Ish who I met on couch surfing, who had a 1-room apartment.
Yeah.
Like that was his whole house was 1 room.
Do you think that this is completely random? It's just thinking about how expensive it is, like to live in San Francisco. I mean, the price of a room anywhere in San Francisco is like absolutely absurd. It's probably more than I make in a month. Do you think that like people like just try to couch surf for a living, like to try to like not have to pay for the outrageous? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I've met people who have couch surfed for months and months on end.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're in a city like that, when I've been in Berkeley, there's been a lot of people who were houseless by choice that told me that they would just couch surf because they couldn't afford to live there.
Yeah. I mean,
so I think yes, I would think
so.
so.
So high. That was my biggest thing. Is like, how in the world are you staying in San Francisco, like spending very little money?
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's an impressive. It's an impressive thing to do. I feel like.
Well, we were only there for a couple days, and we did rent bikes, which I know cost something, but that was really our only expense, I think.
Okay.
Because we did buy snacks and food, but we couch surfed at Ish's house.
Okay.
But by this point, I had some cash.
Yeah.
I remember we ate at a vegan burger place, and we would walk around, which didn't cost money.
Yeah.
So the expenses were pretty low
Cool.
for those couple
Nice.
days.
Yeah. And I also think that just like my lifestyle, that, you know, I'm not like much of a city person, so whenever I hear like going to some of these cities that are so outrageously expensive, and hearing people that are able to navigate them so easily, it's really intriguing to me, I guess.
Yeah, well, that'll be good if we keep talking, you know, about my travels and the trips specifically, because, like I said, I went to Berkeley multiple times, San Francisco multiple times, starting with no money or having a little bit of money that I made or whatever,
Yeah.
and was able to navigate it.
Yeah, I think this is probably an important thing too within traveling, is I feel like it all boils down to the right attitude, and it's interesting because like my attitude and I think my day-to-day life, like how I live my life, like, you know, trying to grow most of the stuff that I consume or build whatever out of like natural materials and stuff. Like I feel like that attitude of not depending so much on like, oh, this is what I need, so I need this cash to have this, to buy this, and I like am like relating things to money.
Yeah.
You know, and like that like as if cash economy is the only way to get by, like that kind of conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
And as opposed to like, oh, this is like I need this, and then like looking around and making do with what I have.
Yeah.
And like, and you enter like this attitude of like, I guess like creativity. You know what I mean? Where creativity is the drive that's gonna get you what you need. You know, I feel like that's something that I've noticed you really have. Like even hearing these stories, it's something that I feel like people need to learn, not just in their everyday life, to kind of get out of like this like cash economy system. I know I'm not like going to go too far into that because
That'd be a whole nother episode.
But also just like to travel on the cheap, you have to like have the right attitude. And I feel like,
or you have to be willing to try new things and not be comfortable all the time.
Yes, and you have to come from a place of like being creative, which I think you do so well. Like hearing about your, you know, like how you got in that swimming pool.
Yeah.
And, you know, like how like many free meals you got, and like the variety of ways that you got them, or maybe not necessarily free. Like you swept the floor, or did something that
Swept the parking lot.
yeah, someone didn't want to do, and they're like, I'm willing to give someone a sandwich for this.
Yeah.
Like, you know, yeah, I think that's worth putting into the podcast, I guess. Just having the right attitude.
Yeah, and comfort is expensive. I mean,
Yeah.
we know that with everyday life, housing, all of these things. It doesn't always have to be. Like, obviously, you've proved that with building a cob house that's comfortable and more sustainable and all of these things. But when you're traveling, usually to be uber comfortable and sometimes uber safe, it's expensive. So budget travel is not for everyone, but it is for those people who are willing to try couch surfing. And if you really, honestly, a lot of people, when I tell them that I did some of these trips starting with no money, not saying I started with no privileges, no backup systems just in case or anything like that, but saying that I literally made it from here to there with X amount of dollars in my pocket, and sometimes it would be zero. You have to be Craigslist rideshare, free, couch surfing, free, like be doing really weird things. You know, people would just be like, you can't do that, or you didn't do that, and it's like, no, I really did.
And that's like
but
the
all this
like,
stuff went into it.
Yeah, that's the difference between like traveling and just being a tourist.
Yes,
you know?
yeah.
And you're gonna see some weird stuff. Some of that weird stuff is awesome. Some of it's just like weird.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, you're just like, you're gonna really like see the world. Like you're gonna you're not looking at some like watered down version of something, or you know, like, or you're you're not going on a cruise where they take you to the Dominican Republic and there's like, you know, people with guns like surrounding the resort to make sure that like, the locals can't get in, you know, like
it's completely different.
Yeah, it's like you're actually in it and you're experiencing it, which is really cool. But I like hearing because I feel like it's so far out of my element some of the things that you're talking about, because I'm like such like you know, in the foresty kind of person, you know, and you're talking about like being in these cities and like staying overnight in them and not like really spending
anything
money, and I'm like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
So it's pretty interesting, like just how like all the creative aspects, and I feel like it's good to hear, because for anyone that's going to be doing this, it's not likely that they're going to do every single thing that you do, but it's just a good like thing to like get to kind of put you in the headspace to learn how to be creative and learn like what works for you
and what options you have to explore.
Totally, like,
as ideas.
Give them a try, because it seems like even that person that you started with, what was his name again?
Which person?
The bike that inspired you to like bike around.
Oh, Rob Greenfield.
Like, even it seems like you tried a lot of his stuff.
Yes.
And some of them like you're still doing to this day.
Yeah.
And then
from years and years ago.
Others like just didn't necessarily work for you. And then there's all these other things in between. That's where like most of it is. Like the in between parts that like really work for you, where you're just like kind of you're on the same like brain level, I guess, like that creative level as he is, but you
get like, into a flow.
Yeah, you're just doing it differently. Like you just found out like what things work for you, and now you can like. It seems like you really navigate with such ease through places, and you know so much. And me, like I'm to get the contrast, you know. Like, because I'm, like, I feel like I'm really good at that, like in the woods or something. You know, like, I'm trying to, like, really budget and stuff, and I brought, you know, our journal.
Yeah.
Where we're keeping a log of everything we spend, and I think I'm doing really, really good, and then I kind of, like, look at how much I spend. Like, we look at how much we both spend, and like, you know, I always end up like, well, how did I end up spending this much? You know, and it's typically on like things that I did for myself. Yeah. And that I feel like you were just able to find more creative ways of almost getting the same thing sometimes.
Yeah, and the thing is that these little things that we spend money on, I've realized, really do add up.
Oh, totally.
Because, for example, on this trip, while I was in Portland, I didn't have toothpaste, and I don't think I had worked for a while. And when I was staying at my friend Kira's house, this was before I worked for her dad in his office, and I was running out of toothpaste, and I was like, oh gosh. And if I, you know, bought that every time I needed on the trip, it could end up being over $20, which at that time was a lot. You know, these little things really do add up. And I remember, I swear to you, this is so weird, but I was dumpster diving for fun because I had stuff at her house that I could eat in the pantry.
Yeah.
But I was just like, at this point, I wonder what the dumpsters look like here, because I had seen so many dumpsters. And I swear to you, in a bag outside of a dumpster was a bag of pasta, an apple, and the toothpaste of the vegan brand of this toothpaste that I really like. And it was a new tube.
Yes.
I swear to you. It was an unopened tube of toothpaste of the brand of toothpaste that I wanted, which is some straight up travel magic. I literally found it by the dumpster before I was about to get in this dumpster. And then I had toothpaste. But, like, also things like I wanted a different bag on that trip because I felt like I was running out of space in my bags. And I found one must have dropped out of their car or they threw it out, the bags that you put the foldable chairs in. and it slung over my back perfectly. It had like the long strap. So I would put my stuff in that for the rest of the trip. Like I used that as a bag, where someone else might have went and spent $100 on a bag that they wanted, or even 20, you know? So sometimes there's just random things that, yeah, people might pay for showers. I remember getting into streams and using those as showers. People might pay to wash their clothes. I would also use streams to wash my clothes. People would stay for housing, like pay for a place to stay overnight or rent a house. I would sleep in my tent in a park. So, yeah, there's like, you can keep breaking down how cheap do you want to go.
Yeah.
And I feel like the more creative they are, the longer you can go on an even smaller budget.
Yeah. And the more fulfilling it is, too. I mean, like...
Yeah, at different times in your life. Like, if you
Yeah.
can do that, if you can handle that, and if you have access to that.
I mean, for whatever reason, like, I feel like... I don't know. I feel like if you make some epic sandwich with something that... with things that maybe you got from a dumpster, you know, and it's, like, clean, and it's delicious, and like, it's maybe even, you know, good for you, healthy, like... I feel like, for me, like, that's a pretty fulfilling thing. Like, it's like much... I'd rather do that almost than pay for something where it's like there's no creativity. It's just kind of like the standard of how we do it, and maybe it you know, all these things, like all the repackaging that we're having to participate in. And it almost feels better too. I mean, just from like a conservation standpoint, where like you're just taking things from the trash. And like preventing it from going into a landfill, as opposed to like adding more things to a landfill.
Definitely.
So I mean, there's so many different ways to look at it, but yeah, creativity is key, I think.
And I also think that obviously we're talking about in the U.S. There's situations where people are living in landfills and eating trash all the time. Obviously, that's not more special than having like a clean meal, you know.
No. And what I'm talking about is like what we're talking about is voluntary.
Yeah, this is all voluntary. That's a big key.
It's a huge difference between doing this voluntary and in a society that's extremely wasteful, that probably throws enough away to feed the rest of the world.
Yeah.
You know,
literally.
Then like talking about like involuntary
poverty,
like just like scrounging for food. Like obviously that's like,
I just felt like we should make a note.
Yeah.
Because that's a big difference.
It's a huge difference. I think anyone that wants to try to pick that apart and act as if there's like that's, you know, that's what we're insinuating at.
Definitely not.
No.
Difference between voluntary and involuntary.
Totally.
And all of this is voluntary in this story.
Yes. Which is...
And it's not a story that's like, I pulled myself up from my bootstraps, or poor me, I didn't have anything. It was like, no, I was traveling.
Yeah. I got lots of help.
Yeah, I got lots of help. But I did work pretty hard to physically power myself around sometimes. Yeah. Tried new things, got creative.
Used some creativity.
But it was all voluntary.
Yeah. Like at the end of the day, like you didn't have to do any of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Then what would you be doing?
Yeah, exactly. So that was a very good to include, I think.
Yeah.
So what were we talking about? San Francisco.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I just want to mention one more thing about this, because we're about to hop over to another state, which is the last state. This was also another creative thing. So when my friend Ben came, you know, we stayed at my mom's friend's house. We stayed in San Francisco with Ish, who we met through couch surfing. And then I can't remember if we wanted to go north again or south, because I can't remember the name of the town. I think we just couldn't find another place to stay in San Francisco to stay longer. And I got a random message on Facebook from someone named Brad, who I still have on Facebook, who I'm friends with, who I haven't seen since this happened, but who said, hey, you need a place to stay? Or something like that. And I was like, Yeah, my friend and I are in San Francisco. I don't think we can stay here longer. And he's like, well, I live outside of San Francisco. You can stay at my place. And I never thought to ask, how did you find me or who are you? And, which I don't know why I didn't wonder that till later. And my friend Ben's like, well, how'd you meet this person? I'm like, I don't know. They messaged me on Facebook. Like, I thought maybe I'd posted, because this whole time I was also posting statuses on Facebook with people I knew. Yeah. Like in real life. Like, hey, do you have any friends in California I can stay with? I'm going to this city. Do you know anyone I could stay with? And multiple times on the trip, I'd found somewhere to stay, like a friend of a friend. So I just thought, I guess subconsciously, maybe he had found me that way. Yeah. But then later, I was like, I didn't post a status about this place, did I? And I realized later I had written on my Tinder bio and then forgotten about it that we were looking for a place to stay in San Francisco. Yeah. And I must have not swiped on him, so our profiles never matched up, but he saw my name and he found me on Facebook. And offered me a place to stay. He was actually really sweet. Nice. And not creepy. And that's good. We somehow got to his house, but we got there late at night, and he left a key for us to let ourselves in. He was, like, probably in his 30s at the time. And, yeah. Or maybe not 30s. Like, older 20s. So we let ourselves in at night. My friend Ben and I, and Ben's my best friend from high school, fell asleep on the couch. And in the morning when we woke up, we were inside his house, but we had never seen him yet. And we could hear him upstairs. And I remember being under the blanket, and we were sleeping on opposite sides of the couch, and I'd kick Ben, and I'd be like, you wake up and say hi, like, introduce us. And he'd kick me, he'd be like, no, you do it. Like, we were, and then he would come downstairs, and we'd pretend like we're asleep. Yeah. Because no one wanted to do it, because it was so awkward. That's funny. And I think that continued on for a little bit, until eventually I'd, like, pretend to wake up. And, you know, introduce ourselves, and then we meet our host for the first time in the morning. But he was so chill, and I think he had 2 other roommates at the time who were there also, and we hung out, we ate food. He took us to this swimming place with his ex-girlfriend, I remember, and we all went swimming, and he brought his best friend along, and his best friend was so fun. His name was Alex, and eventually we went and spent the night at Alex's tiny house before we departed from them. He had a tiny house. I remember it had a loft upstairs and a hammock swing at the bottom, and we all sat in the backyard, had a fire, and watched the stars, which was really fun. And then I feel like, they had a projector inside for movies, and we had a movie night, and he made a really good vegan meal for everyone. And that was the first tiny house I had stayed in. I forget I wish I could remember the town name and what it was made out of, but I can't. But he was an artist, and he was really fun. So it was just a really weird, random, but special time, like special memories. And I got to do all of it with my friend Ben, and that makes everything way more special. But it was just so weird because Ben's like, and how'd you meet this person? And I'm like, I don't know. Just messaged me, and I kind of put the pieces together later. But it was a really good experience. So we did that, and then we're on to our last state, because while all this was happening, I had all that money saved up from Ferndale, and someone that I briefly dated in high school had a best friend who moved to Hawaii that had also dated my friend, and he had gone vegan and was starting to do yoga, because before I left on this trip, I started a yoga group and would teach yoga online. And so we were talking, and he was like, if you want to come to Hawaii, you can come to Hawaii and stay with me. And so I saved up. I had that money that I had saved up, and I bought a ticket and flew to Hawaii. And then I found myself in Honolulu. And everyone always goes, how'd you bike to Hawaii? And I'm like, again. Yeah. I didn't.
You're like lugging your bike around the whole time.
Oh yeah, this whole trip I'm lugging my bike around. But then to Hawaii, I sent it back home.
Okay.
I sent it back to North Carolina.
Nice.
Yeah, at this point I was like, I can't take my bike with me on a plane. I had gotten yelled at so many times for taking a bike on the Greyhound. I was like, I'm not going to try it now.
So you land in Hawaii.
I land in Hawaii, and Josh was there, and I stayed with him for maybe almost a month. And we did some adventures when he wasn't working, and I went to the beach by myself, and I almost drowned. So that was fun. I don't know if I told anyone, and if they're listening to this might be the first time they hear about that, but for some reason I drove myself to the beach and got in the water with no one watching, and a huge wave almost drowned me. So those were probably my two closest experiences to death, and they both happened on that trip. The bike crash and almost drowning in Hawaii. So that was fun. And yeah, we did some hikes. I remember I worked for his roommate, for one of his roommates at a market. She made jewelry, and she was friends with someone who had walked across the United States, actually. So I remember talking to her at the market about traveling and budget traveling and their story of walking across the United States. But I also made some money in Hawaii because I worked at the farmer's market there, helping her sell her jewelry and other creations. So yeah, I just got to know that group of people. Like, I went to a yoga class. Well, actually, I meant to meet one of his roommates at a yoga class, and Josh had dropped me off where we thought the yoga class was, and the roommate never showed up, and I thought, that's weird, and it's because I went to the wrong place. And I did a partner yoga class with some random person that I just met because I had gone to the wrong place. So just really random things like that happened.
And did you get to, do you feel like you explored Hawaii as much as you wanted to, or
feel like I don't think I explored as much as I wanted to, because the situation was weird, because Josh was working at night at the airport, and then he didn't have a car. Then he got a rental car that we were going to use, and I was going to be able to take and explore on my own, and then it got smashed one night, on the side of the road, and another car hit it. So I didn't really have a way to get around. The closest beach that I could walk to was a couple miles away, and I would run to it, but it was a really small, kind of dirty area. Okay. It wasn't like a beach.
It wasn't how you picture a beach in Hawaii.
It wasn't like the beach that I almost drowned at that was really cool that you could drive to.
Okay.
So yeah, the timing was weird, and if I wanted to try to hang out with him, then, I had to be up at different hours, but then I could hang out with his roommates.
Yeah.
So the timing was kind of weird. So a lot of it was just bumping around from person to person and hanging out with different roommates.
Yeah.
Honestly.
But you didn't get to
I didn't explore a ton. We did go on a really epic hike and did spend some time at the beach paddleboarding, but it wasn't like the rest of my trip where I was just off on a whim.
Yeah. What would you say, your favorite things about Hawaii?
Well, I met one of his roommates was a native, and I don't know, I think I really liked hearing stories about her family, and then she was the one that I worked the market with.
Yeah.
And hearing about her relationship with the ocean.
Do you think it'd just be too difficult to paraphrase, or maybe not something that you want?
Well, I do remember one story, and I can't remember exactly how she told me, but she did make jewelry, and I think that her family members, if I remember correctly, had done this too, but she would go diving in the ocean to find pieces seashells and pieces for her jewelry and for her art. And I just remember her, I can't repeat it, but I remember her describing that to me, and her relationship with the ocean was different than I've heard a lot of other people.
Yeah.
So I don't remember how she said it exactly, but it was beautiful how she was talking about diving, and I think she had done it with her uncle maybe. But one of my favorite things about Hawaii was the ocean, and I remember they did take me to this spot that was actually in some residential neighborhood, but they're you have to do this, all the locals do it, and you drive through the neighborhood and you park, and then you walk. I feel like it was almost close to someone's yard, and there's this cliff, and the ocean smacks up against it. but you jump off the cliff into the water.
Oh, God.
And then
That sounds awful.
yeah, it was really scary.
That sounds, yeah.
It was so beautiful. That was such a
Okay.
beautiful spot. We went like before the sun was setting, and the ocean was like, you didn't expect it because you went through this neighborhood, and the ocean was huge out in front of you, and people were sitting on the rocks and such. And I just had been wanting to get out like further into the ocean, but I am a weenie when it comes to that. So this was a way to get out further into the ocean without having to swim out there. And I remember I jumped off the rock, and it was really hard to get back on because the water's smacking up. And I do remember people coming out like with cuts and stuff. And I did panic at one moment because I couldn't get up, but they were all like cheering me on, you know? They're like, you gotta do this. And they were cheering me on and trying to tell me when to get back on the rock. So that was a really good memory, actually.
That sounds intense.
It was intense.
Just thinking, because, you know, like, seeing some pretty gnarly coastlines on the west coast, and envisioning, like, just how fierce some of the, you know, these waves are.
Yeah.
They're just so, yeah.
I mean, the coast that we saw, actually, I did think of that multiple times, like this specific memory, because the coastlines, the ragged coastlines that we saw reminded me of this wild spot.
Yeah, just like so unforgiving.
Yeah.
You know, will just destroy you.
And I have pictures of this spot, and I have
Yeah.
pictures of me jumping into the water, so I'll have to post those with this. Because one of the roommates that I went with took pictures of me jumping in. So I'll definitely share those with this podcast episode.
I'd love to see those too, actually. I haven't seen those yet.
Yeah, I'll show you those. So that was, I think my favorite thing about Hawaii was the ocean and things being more like ocean focused. And on a later trip, I did go back to Hawaii and got to see a little bit more, but at the end of my month there, I thought that I was going to work for a vegan tour, like activism company, I guess, where you go around on the tour bus.
Yeah.
And I was in one of the final rounds of the interview for that, and they were gonna fly me from Hawaii to whatever coast I got.
Yeah.
And they had selected one person, and that person got to select the next person. It was between me and someone else. So I thought that was my ticket home, and they selected the other person, and I didn't get the job. But I was really ready to go home at that point. It'd just been, like 6 months since I had left.
It's a long time to be traveling.
Some big challenges, and
it's exhausting too. It's not like you're on.
It's not a vacation.
Like you're working, and especially if you're not doing it with any money to start, like where you're just kind of like making money as you go, and just trying to really not to use money that much at all. I mean that's
you're working.
Work. Yeah, that can be exhausting.
Yeah, it I think I was exhausted at that point, and I must have. I mean, you know this about me, that when I finally rest, sometimes it all hits me.
Yeah.
And I was the most stationary I had been for that month there.
Yeah.
And it was catching up with me, and I got really homesick, and my depression. I honestly did have I had depression since high school, and I still deal with it. But I remember that month, I think because of the irregular sleep schedule and just slowing down all of a sudden, it really hit me. And I did get really depressed at the end, and I was ready to go home. I was still so glad I went, and it was so nice of Josh to let me stay with him, and all the roommates for taking me in and taking me to all these things and including me. And there were ups and downs the whole trip. There's so much to talk about that we can't fit into the podcast. So I mean, you have your awkward moments and your weird moments and your upset moments and people are mad at you moments and you did something wrong moments. So I think it just did hit me, and at that point I was so homesick. I think my mom finally broke down a little bit more on her I'm not helping you thing because you told me not to.
Yeah.
And she knew I was ready to come home. I'd crossed the country, gone to Hawaii, and she offered to get me a plane ticket home. And I took it, and we didn't tell my dad that I was coming home early. She picked me up at the airport. Before we got home in the neighborhood, she put me in the back. I got out and got in the back of the car under a blanket.
Yeah. Oh,
And my dad didn't know I was supposed to be
that's
back.
So good.
And she told him to get something out of the back of the car. And I came out from under the blanket. I have a picture of that too, actually.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah. And I was back home.
What was your dad's reaction?
Well, when I was a kid, I feel like I physically tried to scare him. I remember physically jumping out from behind things when he'd come out of the bathroom to scare him. And I think I more scared him that way. And then he realized it was me, and then he was laughing and smiling, and my mom has a picture of us hugging.
Oh, that's so
So that was kind of the close to that chapter in that whole entire trip.
Wow.
Which was also weird, and the whole trip was
Yeah.
weird, so that was perfect.
Yeah. That's an amazing trip. I mean,
Yeah.
6 months of travel time with doing, I mean, just starting with so little. And the cost of everything combined. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And it seems like the amount that you learn along the way. I mean, just it's like a fast track to learning. I mean, just like
Yeah.
coming across all these different types of people.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
It was so wild, and the more we talk about it, the more I really do want to write a book on it, because it was such a story, and it really does make me think of the book and the movie Wild,
Yeah.
because that was that woman's experience hiking the AT
Yeah.
and coming through all of these things and overcoming things, and it did really feel like my version of that felt and feels very ordinary to me, but then when I tell it more, I realize it's not the most ordinary thing.
No. And I think, I mean, it definitely shaped you, to such a pretty high degree of who you are today,
Yeah.
And it's just so funny, like traveling with you now and just seeing, like, all of these parallels.
Of me trying to get things for free.
Like, just like the things, like, wait, what do you want to try to do? What are we doing right now?
Yeah.
And it's just really, it's interesting,
Mhm.
And it all clicks, I feel like. I think you could have a series of books on your travels, and then, like, maybe, like, a third book in, people be like, yeah, all of this makes sense.
Yeah, it wouldn't be surprising anymore.
Thank you for sharing that, and it's really been interesting, finally traveling with you for so long, and you kind of getting a good timestamp on all of these things, because we've been traveling this trip, like we said, it's been over 2 months now, and I don't, like, just your random experiences pop up sometimes, like, especially for in a certain area, like they'll pop up daily, and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to piece it all together, and none of it makes sense. So, like, this podcast here is so impromptu, because it was literally, I think you had just said something about one of your trips, and I was just like, I need to hear this from the beginning. Like, I want to, like, let's start at the beginning so I can get, like, a good grasp and of how all this came about. Like,
Yeah.
how in the world did you, like, make it to meet me?
Yeah.
Which is so
Which was also
good.
through traveling. If I
Yeah.
wouldn't have traveled, I literally wouldn't have met you. Maybe in some other way later.
Possibly.
But
yeah, so random and weird, especially, because I was, like, this, like, hermit on the mountain with no social media.
yeah.
Living in a mud hut, like, off grid.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating how all of it came together. And I feel like it's a story that I feel like has a lot of meaning and that people can learn from, as far as just like, you know, like if they're interested in adventure or they want to get out there but they don't know where to start. And like, I think you're kind of an inspiration that's just like, well, walk outside your front door, shut it. Like,
well, remember that podcast that we mentioned that Sam did, the one that you listened to about couch surfing?
Yeah.
About his couch surfing and ways to stay safe. He started that travel that he did by walking out his front door, and hitchhiking. Yeah. So sometimes it's like, really just start where you are if you can.
Yeah. I think anyone that's interested in travel, another good place to start is if like you're not ready, like maybe you have like some things you need to wrap up, responsibilities maybe that you need to figure out how to, you know, navigate around and stuff. Start out by hearing other people's stories.
Yeah.
Like listening to someone's travel story on a podcast on your way to work. You know, like I think that's a great way just to hear like how all these other people are doing it, and that it's not about money. And oftentimes, like what we think is getting in the way of I feel like that is preventing us from traveling. Like, you know, aren't the right things. Like our focus isn't in the right place.
Yeah.
You know, I think that we often put too much emphasis on currency, especially when it comes to traveling, and a number of other things too.
Yeah.
You know, like I met when we were in this trip, I stopped and met a friend in Southern California who was talking about, you know, wanting to travel and stuff, and wanted to get a camper, you know, and couldn't travel until they had a camper. And they're like able-bodied, super athletic, like very, I mean,
like fit young people,
young person, and it's like, why do you think you need a camper? Like,
yeah.
And to think like how expensive a lot of that would be, and not only that, but it's like, you know, you're gonna have to like find campgrounds to park that camper, like when we were at Mammoth Lakes, you know, we were in a van. Like we went to Mammoth Lakes during the day, and there's hot springs all around, like you can hike to, but they were all full, and it's like during COVID, so you're obviously not gonna get in the hot spring with somebody else. Like some people were, but like we weren't gonna take that risk. So like if you were in a camper, it's not like you're gonna park your
camper there
in that little tiny dirt road parking lot. There's no way, it's not gonna happen. So like you're probably just gonna have to forget it and then pay for a really expensive campsite somewhere in Mammoth Lakes. But like we literally just like got in our van, you know, like hung out, like took a rest because we had a pretty long drive that day.
Yeah.
And waited for
it to open up.
Yeah, like sun went down, it got dark, people left, and like we hopped in, you know.
And if we would have traveled like I did back in the day, which we wouldn't be right now because of COVID, but let's say we did, and we didn't wait until we had a camper and we just had our backpacks, we literally could have set up our tent right next to it and just waited till no one was there.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can do more with, a lot of the time you can do more with less when you're carrying less when it comes to traveling.
Yeah, you don't have to like lug as much around, you know, like you don't have to like, oh, I gotta like haul all of this around with me.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's like you can get by with a lot less, and I think it's also just like finding your like happy medium, you know. But I think if you're like in your 20s or 30s or 40s or whatever, and you're thinking that you need all of these things before you go out and do something, it's like, I can understand.
You might not.
Yeah, I can understand if you're like old,
Or if you have a disability.
Or if you have a disability, or all those things. Like, yeah, there's going to be a number of, just more comforts that
or if you have children.
Or if you have children. Granted, we did come across that one person in Sedona.
Oh, yeah.
They had 3 kids.
In a van.
In, like, a Sprinter van.
Doing it.
That were from Florida and Sedona, Arizona. Like, they're straight up living in there. And it seemed like, I don't know how long they were on, they're doing it. I don't know if it was like their entire, like that was just their life. But, I mean, they all looked really happy.
Yeah, and really healthy.
And really healthy. Yeah,
that was
really
a nice
healthy,
van.
Really happy. I mean, it was a nice van.
It was a big van.
Yeah, it was like a big Sprinter that you could like stand up and stuff in. But, I mean, I could totally see how that could work. Like having, like maybe a bunk bed style where like you share a bed with your partner, and they might even have a bed that's larger than ours. I mean, ours is like smaller than a twin size.
Yeah.
But we sleep good in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then like lower bunk, 2 little ones share a bed, and then maybe like a pull out, what would you call that? Like a pull out crib.
Yeah.
For like the little baby.
They had a baby.
Yeah. But I mean, they were doing it, and they were hiking, and it seemed like they're definitely driving around camping and things.
Sorry for everyone that had to hear me sneeze. Sometimes you're recording an episode and you're like, how do I do this really quietly? But it's still recorded.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a really good point, Tim, and I feel like that's important to say, especially as we wrap up the podcast episode. I'd like to say 2 more things. One, on these trips, the magic is the journey of getting around. Oftentimes it's not, I'm finally here. Yeah, like how I was so depressed in California because I thought everything would be different. You would think I would have learned from that whole trip that the best part of it is just getting there. But I hadn't even learned it at that point. So sometimes that's way harder to learn than it is than just saying it. And, I feel like that is important to know, that you're going to learn so much that you don't even know you need to learn. I learned about so many topics that are just important to life on that trip. I learned about sexuality and gender and body hair and, I mean, just so many things and different things about race and all of these things that I didn't think I was going to learn. And the last tip that I want to give people is that if you are able to travel like this and it's something you can voluntarily do and you're wanting to, I mean, obviously things are weird with COVID right now, but like Tim said, the first step is just doing a little bit of research. You don't have to plan your trip, because obviously my trip wasn't planned hardly at all, and I ended up, from what little plans I have, deviating off of those. So the first step is just listening to other people just to get inspired, to get some ideas, especially if you're budget traveling or alternative traveling. And the biggest thing is telling people what you want to do. Because if I would have kept to myself that I wanted to travel but didn't really know how to, like I didn't know how people did it on a budget, this person from episode 1 of this story, not of the whole podcast, but of this series, would have never said, oh, well, I heard that someone traveled across the country with no money just doing speaking engagements. And I would have never thought, oh, someone did it, so I can too. And maybe would have never done the whole trip. So a big part of it is just telling people what you want to do, even if you have no plan. And not being afraid of what they're going to say. Because in the end, if I took every piece of advice or negative thing that people told me before I left and during the trip about how I couldn't do what I was doing, or how it was going to fail, or how I couldn't do it because I didn't have the most expensive gear, I mean, I might not be sitting here with you because I wouldn't have done all these travels, So, biggest tips, start looking for some inspiration, searching out people who are giving it to you, especially for free, like this one, like this episode. I mean, lots of good information in a story, and telling people what you want to do. Is there anything else that you want to add, Tim, before we wrap this baby up?
I mean, I could go on forever, I feel like.
Well,
a whole,
we
there
probably
could be
will. We will go
yeah.
on more.
And I think even like a whole podcast on telling people what you want to do would be good. I mean, like the power of
Yeah.
manifestation. Like, you know, I mean, if you're wanting to be an actor and you're a server and someone asks you what you do, like, probably tell them that you're an actor.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
Like, I mean, that's all. Like, you know, and maybe eventually you come across somebody like telling someone that, like, that can help you in that. I mean, yeah.
Definitely.
I think there's definitely power in words and making sure that you're very specific too.
Yeah.
With what you want to do.
Definitely, because we meet random people who can help us or support us, or we can help and support in the strangest of places.
Totally.
So, I just, yeah.
That's a good place to end, I guess.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for listening, and please, if you got anything out of this series of episodes that we're doing on kind of reintroducing me and telling my story and what happens when you're bit by the travel bug and you just can't seem to shake it and you have to do it even though you don't really know how, share this episode with a friend if you think that they'd enjoy the story or that the tips and tricks would be really useful, and share it to your social media. Rate the podcast. It's something you can do for free that is really supportive and helpful to me in this show. But yeah, thank you for listening, for following along. I know this was a long story, but I think it was a good one.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm actually still like interested in hearing even more, because there seems to be so much more that I have yet to connect, as far as how you got to where I met you.
Oh, there's a lot. So
So
we could always keep recording tomorrow while we drive. We have 6 more hours tomorrow. We could do some other trips packed into one and keep the story going until up to date.
yeah, I'm okay with that.
All right, everyone. Well, buckle up. Get ready for the next episodes.